سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم أجمعين. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله لنريه من آياتنا إنه هو السميع البصير. Exalted is the one who took his servant Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam by night from al-Masjid al-Aqsa, from al-Masjid al-Haram, which is in Mecca, to al-Masjid al-Aqsa, which is in Jerusalem, which we blessed its surroundings, that we, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, may show him, Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, of our signs. Indeed, he, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is all hearer and all seer. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described al-Masjid al-Aqsa of the blessed, this is not the only ayah that where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talking about Masjid al-Aqsa and its surrounding, which is the entire area of Palestine. Some of the scholars mention that it also includes the entire Levant region, meaning Bilad al-Sham, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine. This blessed, the issue of Palestine mentioned in the Quran as a blessed land more than 5 times in the Quran, mentioned as a holy land in the Quran. So it's not a matter, like I'm always saying, it's not a matter of nationalistic issue, it's a matter of Islamic issue. And all the things that Brother Yazan was talking about, this is all happening since 1948. All right, so all this suffering for 75 years led what it led to October 7. But why October 7? We will find out in a few minutes. But Palestine, the history of it started from 9,000 years ago, 9,000 BC to be exact. And the first city, the oldest city in the world to be built is the city of Jericho, Ariha in Arabic. And then after that, the Canaanites came, and the Canaanites are from the Arab Peninsula. They are Arabs who migrated from the Arab Peninsula for drought reasons and for seeking better life in other areas, and they moved to the land, to that region, which later on for many years was called the land of Canaan. And that was 4000 BC. And it stayed like that for a very long time. So if you take any Palestinian who lives in that region, as a matter of fact, if you take anyone from the Levant and from Bilad al-Sham, and take their DNA, you will find that they belong to that region. Their DNA says this is their land. This is where they belong to. Now you go and do that by court order, because DNA test is not allowed in the Zionist entity. You have to take it by court order. If they get a court order and get a DNA, they are either from Eastern Europe, Western Europe, America, Africa, wherever they are from. But they will never see a DNA attachment, a test, and that's why it's not legal. They have to take court order to do that. But for us, it proves this is our land. Then in the third millennial, Ibrahim alayhi salam moved from the city of Ur to city of Ur is in Iraq, and to Palestine. And in Palestine, that's when Prophet Ishaq was born, alayhi salam. Then around the same time, the Jebusites, the Yabusiyin or Jebusites, are also offshoot from the Canaanites, who came from the Arab Peninsula also and moved into the land of Canaan at that time, but they moved all the way to the heart of it, where Jerusalem is, and they are the first one to build Jerusalem, and at that time they called it Yabus, in reference to their tribe, the one who moved there and built it. And then after that we know the story of Musa alayhi salam, when he left Egypt, but he was never able to enter Palestine. He was very close by. He passed away in the Sinai desert, but he was as the hadith of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, very close by. They were not allowed to enter because of the sins the Israelites had committed. And the first time they entered Palestine was through this, who was the servant of Musa alayhi salam, that's Prophet Yusha bin Nun, and who you will hear his name in the Bible or read his name in the Bible and the Torah as Prophet Joshua alayhi salam. So Yusha bin Nun is the first one who united the Israelites and was able to defeat the Canaanites, who in the Quran mentioned as al-Qawm al-Jabbarin, the giants, or the well mentioned in the Bible and the Torah as the Amalekites. Now Joshua alayhi salam is the one was mentioned by Netan as Netanyahu, meaning who quoted Prophet Joshua in Deuteronomy chapter 25 verses 17 to 19 in public after the incidents of October 7 to give the reasons why he's gonna wipe out. This is beside the verse that Yazan read from Old Testament Samuel, book of Samuel 1. I'm reading it from Deuteronomy, another verse, wherein Nitin, that terrorist, is giving himself and quoting a prophet to give him the right to kill the Amalekites. In Arabic means Al-Amalek means giants, meaning Jabbarin. It's all the same name. So what did he quote? Do not forget what Amalek did to you on the road after you left Egypt. How he attacked, how the Amalekites attacked you when you were tired, barely able to put one foot in front of another, mercilessly cut off your stragglers, and had no regard of God. When God, your God, so he's speaking on behalf of God, gives you rest from all the enemies that surround you in the inheritance land, God. Your God is giving you to possess and you to wipe out and then the Amalek from off earth, and do not forget. He said, you saw that on CNN. It was advertised all over. This is what a Netanyahu read to give the right to wipe out the Amalekites, the giants, the Palestinians off the face of earth. This is what and then he goes, don't forget what they did to you. So he's in another word, he's giving himself, saying that God told them to do so. And Allah told us in the Quran, Allah will never order to do al-fahisha, to do the evil thing. So that neo-Nazi terrorist did this to incite the Christian Zionists, who are part of the root causes of the Palestinian plight, as we shall see in few. This is why you hear a lot of, especially the Republicans, came right out and said, kill them all, show them hell, wipe them out, send them to hell. And you heard 2 days ago Nikki Haley saying you should take them all out to Qatar, to Egypt, to Turkey, to wherever land that will accept them. Take them all out. This is like they say, one of them, the blue is the least of the two evils, and look, the least of the two evils was done. Imagine what the other ones are going to do. So then after Yusha bin Nun alayhi salam won that battle and settled in Jericho, they did not go to Jerusalem. They were not able to defeat the Canaanites to go to Jericho, to Jerusalem. Then after that, the Canaanites were able to defeat the Israelites and kick them back out to the eastern side of the Jordan River. During that time, this is where the Palestine mentioned in the Bible and the Torah to some Christians and Jews they are not the Canaanites. The Palestine, there is a tribe came from Crete. Crete is an island belong to Greece and other areas from Europe. They are Aryans. And Ramses III of ancient Egypt asked them, at that time Palestine, or the land of Canaan at that time, was with Egypt also. So Ramses III of ancient Egypt asked them to stay in the area in the south of the land of Canaan named Palestine. So there was a city over there called Palestine. Hence these Aryan immigrants were called Palestinians. All right? But and then later on they changed the name to Philistines. And these Aryan Philistines completely integrated and melted into the Jebusites, who moved into Palestine, and the Canaanites, and never had a culture or any settlement. So these Palest or Philistines who came from Crete completely integrated into the Canaanites or the Jebusites, the Arabs, and their DNA was all gone because they completely integrated into them. So when Prophet Dawood alayhi salam came and defeated the Canaanites, defeated al-Qawm al-Jabbarin, as mentioned in the Quran, defeated Goliath, okay, and at that time Dawood alayhi salam is the Muslim, and the Goliath or the Canaanites were the idol worshippers, and that was after 1000 BC. But if you read the Bible or the Torah, you will read that Dawood alayhi salam defeated the Philistines, which is not true, and I'll give you the proof in a minute. And they gained Dawood alayhi salam gained complete control over the area of the land of Canaan. And right after that, Sulaiman alayhi salam, after the passing away of Dawood, Sulaiman alayhi salam had the kingdom, and this kingdom stayed powerful and united for 90 years. After that, the Israelites had the civil war among themselves, and the original state of Israel was divided into two states. The southern state, which is called Judea, and the northern state, which is north of Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was part of the Judea state of the south. The rest of the West Bank, from Nablus and above all the way to the north, it was the Samaria, the northern state of Israel. That northern state of Israel was destroyed by the Assyrian Empire from Iraq. So I want you to remember this. Assyrian Empire was from Iraq that destroyed the northern state of Israel. The southern state of Israel was destroyed in 586 BC by the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar. And where is Babylon? Is in Iraq. So both of them are Arabs. The Assyrians and the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar, they are Arabs. And why I'm saying this? Because when you read Surah Al-Isra, Surah Bani Israel, when Allah mentions in that surah for the second or for the last tribes, that Allah is saying, ثُمَّ رَدَدْنَا لَكُمُ الْكَرَّةَ عَلَيْهِمْ, that we gave you the upper hand on them. Who's them? The one who got you out the first time. Who got them out the first time? The Arabs. When in history there was a battle between the Israelites and the Arabs where they defeated, it never happened. You will never see it, right? Except in 1948. That was their second choice. So Dr. Israel Finkelstein, and I think Brother Asif sent that as an article to all of us on WhatsApp one time. But Dr. Israel Finkelstein, an archaeologist at the University of Tel Aviv, attested that he could not find any signs or artifact to indicate that these Aryan Philistines who came from Crete existed at around the time Dawood alayhi salam had the war with Goliath, with the Canaanites, with the giants, with the Amaleks. Whatever name you want to give them, it's the same thing. Also, these Aryan immigrants were not huge. But the Quran was very specific, and the Bible and the Torah, all three of them say that the war was with the giants. All of them say that, but only the Quran says that they were with the Canaanites, with the giant, right? Not the Philistines. According to Dr. Finkelstein, the Canaanites were giants, and the current Philistines are Canaanites. Also, only artifacts and signs of Canaanites and Jebusites and Romans. Canaanites and Jebusites are the Arabs, and the Romans and the Greeks and others, but never Jewish or Aryan Philistines. Why the Roman and Greek, I'll tell you in a minute. But even their own archaeologists, and there was many studies done by Harvard universities and Columbia, that they went there to find out. They couldn't find any artifact to prove that there was any artifact for the Israelites, only for us Palestinians, the Canaanites. Then the Persians came in 539 and first of all, when the Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonians and the Assyrians took the Israelites out of Palestine to Iraq and Persia, and then the Persians were able to defeat all of them and was able to take Palestine at that time, they allowed some of the Jews to come back to Palestine, and they gave them autonomous rule over Jerusalem. They did not give them a state. Then after that, the Greeks took over Palestine, and that's the first time the name Palestine came about in honor of the Philistines who came from Crete. The Greeks are the ones who called the land of Canaan Palestine, and still around until today. Then the Maccabeans Jews revolted against the Greeks around 167 BC, and it was quelled. And then the Romans came and defeated the Greeks, and the Romans gave also the Jews autonomy over Jerusalem to the Jewish kings, but not a state, only autonomy to worship, to have their own worship. During that time, 72 BC and 4 BC, that's when Isa alayhi salam was born. During that time also, when the second temple was built. The first temple was during the time of Sulaiman alayhi salam, and the second temple was during the King Herod. At around the same time Prophet Isa alayhi salam was born. During that time, Palestine was not only the western side of the Jordan River, the Romans made it also the adjoining lands of the Jordan River, meaning what is it called today? Jordan was since 72 BC as Eastern Palestine, and it was like that until World War I. So we had Western Palestine and Eastern Palestine. Palestine and Jordan, what you have today, is actually Palestine up until World War I. All right? And there is evidence on that from ancient Egyptian writing, Persian, Assyrian, and Babylonian, indicating that the name Philistines was adopted to be given to the Canaanites by the Greek first, then the Romans made it official. During the time of Isa alayhi salam, Jerusalem was called Shlaim. That's the name that was given to it. Then after that, the Roman Empress Helena adopted Christianity as the religion of the land. So up to this point, when Dawood alayhi salam and Sulaiman took over Palestine, or the land of Canaan, the Canaanites converted to Judaism. Then when Isa alayhi salam came, they converted to Christianity, and a few of them stayed as Jews, but they stayed there, right? So altogether, the actual number of years that the Jews stayed in Palestine, if you do all the addition, going back and forth, 90 years, consecutive 90 years, united Israel, and then the other about 350 years, the two states of Israel, and then going back and forth between Iraq and Syria and Palestine, and altogether it's 415 years to 450 years where the Jews lived in the land of Canaan or in Palestine. But the Canaanites, us Palestinians, been living there, never left since 4000 BC. Whether we were Jews, we were Christians, and then we became Muslims, we never left our land. This is our land. Then they came the time of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, the prophethood years, during the 27 of Rajab, which was around the 10th year or the 10 and a half years of prophethood, right before the migration, when the miraculous trip took place. And we know, and we mentioned it many times, Allah could have taken Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam to ascend to heavens from Mecca, but there was a reason why to take him from Jerusalem. All right? So there was this is the three important things from to the Muslim for Jerusalem or Palestine as a whole. We know when the Muslims were in Mecca, they were praying toward, the Qibla was toward Jerusalem up until the second year of Al-Hijrah. So we're talking about 15 years. The Qibla of the Muslims were Jerusalem. So Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam prayed toward Jerusalem more than he prayed toward Mecca. The second thing, the ascension to the seventh heaven, the miraculous trip happened from Jerusalem to give the ownership and the command of Jerusalem away from the Jews to the Muslims. This is the message that Allah wanted to give Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, that from now on, the command of Jerusalem, the command of Palestine is at the hands of the Muslims, not the Jews anymore. And the third thing, he wanted to show him that the issue of Palestine, the issue of Jerusalem is attached to monotheism. And this is one time a Sheikh, our young Sheikh, Khadr Ali, mentioned it in one of his speeches. And it's in Surah Al-Zughruf, chapter 43, verse 45. وَاسْأَلْ مَنْ أَرْسَلْنَا مِنْ قَبْلِكَ مِنْ رُسُلِنَا أَجْعَلْنَا مِنْ دُونِ الرَّحْمَنِ آلِهَةً يَعْبُدُونَ. And ask those whom we sent from before you of our messengers. This is Allah telling Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam to ask these messengers, because this ayah, this verse, was revealed when he led the messengers in Jerusalem. This ayah was revealed in Jerusalem. Did Allah make from beside the most gracious gods to worship? All right? So, Abdullah ibn Abbas, the cousin of Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, may Allah be pleased with both of them, explains that when this ayah revealed to Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam, Rasul went and asked the prophets and the messengers when he led them in prayers, did you teach any of you? And he knows the answer, but he was asked to ask them. And he asked them and they said, no, we taught them to teach that there is only one God. So and because of that, you will hear all our scholars saying that the issue of Palestine is attached to the issue of monotheism. This is the three important things that every Muslim needs to understand, the importance of Palestine to us, to every Muslim. So it's the duty, the holy duty of every Muslim to protect. From that time, the Muslims understood that it's their duty to protect Palestine against the encroachment or the attack from any aggression, whether they were the Byzantines or the Persians or anybody who attacks it. At the time, and then later on move forward to Khalifa Umar, may Allah be pleased with him, when he took over the Palestine, Jerusalem was named Ilya. That's the name of it, and then he was the one who changed it to Jerusalem. And he refused to, even though the Bishop of Jerusalem wanted him to pray in the Church of Holy Sepulchre, he said, I will not pray there because the Muslims will come after me, destroy the church and make it a mosque. I'll pray somewhere else. He prayed outside, and wherever Khalifa Umar prayed, that's when they made the Masjid of Khalifa Umar. And by the way, the keys of that church, of the Holy Sepulchre, the keys for it, the Christians in Palestine trusted with the Muslims until today. So, and then Khalifa Umar built Masjid al-Qabli and the Dome of the Rock. He cleaned it up because that's where Rasul alayhi salatu wasalam was ascended from. So, but I want to make sure, and I know I mentioned this before, the Masjid al-Aqsa is not the Dome of the Rock only. The Masjid al-Aqsa is the 144 dunam, and a dunam is a quarter acre, so 35 acre of land is in Masjid al-Aqsa that has the Dome of the Rock, the Masjid al-Qibli, and the Marwani Mosque, and other well waters and other landmarks all in there. So it's not only that. So after that, all the Khalifas that came, all the Muslim dynasties that came afterward, they took care of it. There was an earthquake that was destroyed the Masjid al-Aqsa. The Muslims rebuilt it. But then later on, we know that Muslims got weak during the Abbasi Empire, and the Crusaders took over Palestine in 1099 when the Muslims were weak. This is why you hear a lot of our shuyukh and scholars, they say Palestine is a reflection of the amount of faith of the Muslims. All right? So that time the Muslims were fighting with each other. The Abbasi Empire was weak. Palestine was gone again. All right? And it was under the Crusaders for 88 years. Now the tragedy during their time, though, there was no prayers allowed. The Dome of the Rock was transferred to the Church of Jesus. El Qibli Mosque was transferred to a church, into a church, and the other part and headquarters of it was changed to the place for the Crusader Knights to sleep in. El Marwani Mosque was turned into the horse stable, and the whole Aqsa area, the 144 dunum or the 35 acres, was turned into horse waste, liquor drinking, and other bad things that happened. So no prayers in the Masjid al-Aqsa for 88 years during the Crusaders, until Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi came and liberated most of Palestine, including Masjid al-Aqsa in 1187 in a battle called Hattin. But the northern part of Palestine was still under the Crusaders, that from the area of Haifa, Akka, where I'm from, and north, that stayed under the Crusaders. Later on was liberated by the Mamlukis. But unfortunately, during the Ayyubi's time, there was some treasons because of conflicts among themselves. They gave actually Jerusalem to the Crusaders back for 10 years for power struggles among themselves. But then they cleaned up their act, and it was back with the Muslims. Then the Mongols tried to conquer Palestine, and the ones who defended it are the Mamluks. The Sultan Qutuz of Egypt at that time, he's the one who destroyed the Mongols and did not allow them to take Palestine over. And then right after that, the Muslims liberated the rest of Palestine from the Crusaders. In 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte came and tried to attack Palestine and take it over from the city where I'm from, Akka, in the north, and he failed. But during that time, this is the first time where the attempt to have the Jews to come to Palestine. He actually wrote a letter to Jewish leaders in Europe to rise up against their oppressors in Europe and migrate to Palestine, and that they will be under the protection of the French army. This is the first attempt to have the Jews come from Europe to Palestine, and of course it failed. I want to make sure we understand that for us Muslims, Zionism is not Judaism. Zionism is a political racist movement which believes on the right of Jews' hometown in Palestine. A supporter of Zionism is a person who believes in the development and protection of a Jewish nation in what it is now called Israel. A person cannot claim to be a Muslim and a supporter of Zionism. A Muslim who is supporting Zionism is considered by a lot of scholars as a kafir and out of the realm of Islam, because he denies Palestine being a Muslim land. So Arab Zionists, if they believe that, they went out of the realm of Islam. And I want to make sure that there is, we don't have, I don't mean Palestinians, I mean Muslims. We don't have a problem with Jews. The problem with Jews is actually European problem, is not a Muslim problem. The Jews always lived in peace with the Muslims, and history proves that. And to go and call Arabs in general to be anti-Semitic is the stupidest thing you ever hear. Because each one of you, if you open your Mufti Google right now and just write the word Semitic, you will find the biggest Semitic group is Arabs. So how can we be anti ourselves? So anti-Semitism is an immoral behavior of white men in Europe and not the behavior of Muslims. All right. Our problem is with apartheid, brutal occupier, neo-Nazis, terrorist Zionist entity, which is ethnically cleansing the Palestinians and committing acts of genocide and Holocaust against the indigenous people of Palestine for the past 75 years, as you heard Brother Yazan was talking. Okay, and this is all supported by the 5 permanent members of the United Nations. The birth of Zionism started with Theodor Herzl, who tried in 1860, who tried to nationalize Judaism and wanted to buy Palestine from the last decent Sultan Abdul Hamid, back in April 27, before he was ousted back in April 27, 1909. But Sultan Abdul Hamid for him protecting Palestine because he knew the plan, he was ousted. During that time in the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire was weak. It was infiltrated by the Zionists. It was infiltrated, and the Young Turks and the Union and Progress Nationalist Party of Turkey were infiltrated by Zionism and Freemasonry. And there was a marriage between Freemasonry and Zionism so that they can destroy Islam and destroy the Khilafah. And they succeeded through the nationalist Turks. And that's how Al-Khilafah was destroyed. One of the reasons how it was destroyed. But prior even to the removal of Al-Khalifa Abdul Hamid, the British knew that that day will come. So from 1905, the British, under the Prime Minister named Bannerman, did a conference with other European powers and colonists during that time, 7 of them: Britain, France, Spain, Portugal, Italy, Belgium, and Netherlands, to figure out what we're gonna do toward the Muslim Arab population of the Ottoman Empire, because the Ottoman Empire was the sick man of Europe and it was about to collapse. So for 2 years, and they brought experts from oil, because they discovered oil in Iraq at that time, right? Experts from oil, gas, geology, geopolitics, social sciences, everything. They brought the Orientalists. They had people study Islam just for these reasons. And they stayed for 2 years to come up to a conclusion that we need to create and establish a state to be a buffer state in Palestine. And that report proposed this state to be hostile to its neighbors and friendly to Europe. The aim was to divide the region, so assure Britain continued imperial dominance. And after that, who inherited that dominance? The US. All right? So the US is following what I'm about to say. Why they want to create that buffer state, which later on we're going to find out that was the Zionist, and why it was the Zionist, the Jewish Zionist, that is. To separate the Arab East from the West. Egypt is bordering Gaza. I want you to imagine the map of Palestine, where Gaza is in the south, and the first northern African Arab country is Egypt. The first Asian Arab country is Palestine. If you take Palestine out, you're separating the Arab East from the Arab West. Okay? And that way you create a chasm among the Arabs and do a crack. The state has to be loyal to the West. Well, how this buffer state has to be loyal to the West? Then it has to be white people to be there, right? To keep the Arab countries from the Persian Gulf, Kuwait, later on the Arab Peninsula, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, wherever, Iraq, all these regions, all the way to the Mediterranean, and Morocco has the Mediterranean, and Mauritania has the Atlantic Ocean. Look from the Persian Gulf all the way to the Mediterranean and the Atlantic Ocean, so that there is an imbalance in there. Such a foreign body would be dependent on European colonialism. Its survival would be guaranteed in return for keeping surrounding states weak. And this is what happened. They planned this in 1905, and that was the conclusion in 1907, and this is exactly what happened. So you understand why when the current occupant of the White House, when he says if the state of Israel did not exist, we will create one, because of this notion from 1907, because they want to make sure Islam never comes back, Arabs never rise. The Europeans also believed that the Jews to be closer to them than the Arabs. A Jewish state here would be better for them. Hence the neo-Nazi Zionist entity is the West, and the US colonial project is the heart of the Arab East and the Muslim world. Chaim Weizmann, the first president of the state of the Zionist entity, in 1907, he was a British national, and he was a chemist. And he was building materials that are good to use for bombs. And so he said they utilized him because he gave them that material, because France and Britain ran out of money, and he gave it to them. He supplied it to them all for free to build their bombs, right? And because of that, they gave him that promise, all right? So Haim Weizmann, a chemist who had emerged as a leader among British Zionists, visited Palestine as a British, and he set out to establish a company in Java, to develop a land of Palestine, a practical means to pursue the Zionist dream of building a Jewish state. His venture was supported by Rothschild, as we all know who's Rothschild. Christian Zionists are mostly Protestants. When Martin Luther and John Calvin came, they believed that the only way for Jesus, their Savior, to come back is for Jews to gather and migrate to Palestine. The Jews, on the other hand, they believed the only way for them to go to Palestine is for the Savior, the Antichrist, to come back and to take them to Palestine. And that will be at the time of our Dajjal, right? After the Mahdi comes. So it's opposite thinking. So when Balfour, the Prime Minister of Britain at that time, who gave the promise to Jews for the land in Palestine, when the Russians were prosecuting Jews, they were running away from there. He did not. This Balfour, who gave the promise to the Jews, he did not allow the Jews to migrate to Britain. As a matter of fact, they were not even allowed to migrate to the US because the Protestants wanted them to go to Palestine because to speed up the comeback of Jesus. That's what they believe. So this is now the heavy part where why is it that back then, the Christian powers, or the white man back then, the colonial power, and today, the 5 permanent members, or the 3 of them, and the NATO members, why they insist on keeping and protecting that entity. They want to resolve the Jewish problem in Europe back then, or the problem of Europe back then with your Jews. So go and put them all in Palestine, to guarantee that Muslims in general and Arabs in particular never ever rise again, and to be a superpower after the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. So the issue of Palestine is a Muslim issue because by coming back of this is why you find all of them. Before I continue, let me tell you this. There is a joint intelligence power right now in Tel Aviv and the vicinity of Gaza, from the US, Britain, France, Italy, Germany, and of course the Zionist entity, 6 of them. Why? They're getting weapons not only from the US, the second one is Germany, France, all the ships, submarines, all of them. Why? Because of this. They are afraid that the Arabs, that if the Palestinians win, that will ignite Arab Spring 2.0, and it's not going to be peaceful. And that will make the Arab rise. They don't want the Arabs to rise. They don't want the Muslims to rise. The third thing, the supply of oil. Back then, it was in Iraq to Europe. It was through the city of Haifa in Palestine, northern Palestine. And there was idea flowing back then to go through the Aqaba, but they didn't have the technology. It was too expensive. So they decided to go from Iraq through Transjordan. They created this another buffer state called Transjordan for this reason, to transfer the oil to Europe. Then the US, European Union, and the terrorist Zionist entity are trying to make an alternative route these days of Suez Canal through a route which goes across occupied Palestine to north of Gaza to the Mediterranean, then to Europe, to call it Ben Gurion Canal. And this idea came from the 1960s. The Americans refused it because they don't want remember, the idea is to create the buffer state dependent on Europe, and later on Europe and the US. They don't want them to be strong on their own. The natural gas discovered in Gaza waters. This is the reasons for this war. This is why they want to make sure that if they can take all the Palestinians out of Gaza, that would be awesome. Also, the US does not want the Middle East to distract it from the issue of Russia and China. So the US wants to give more influence and power to its proxy, the neo-Nazi terrorist Zionist entity, more power to influence the region through economic powers. All right? So hence you have the Abrahamic Accord, the Abrahamic religion now you have in the Gulf. That way the US and the Zionist entity would be in control of 90% of international navigation lanes and multi-billion dollar gains to the US and terrorist Zionist entity. You know, this September, right? Just in September, the G20 that happened in India, and the leaders of the United States, India and Saudi Arabia, among others, announced plans to set up rail and ports links between the India to the Gulf, to the Middle East, to Europe, right? And to go through where? To go through the Israel, the Zionist entity. Look at the money. And who's helping them? The Arab Zionists, right? And then, you can Google this right now as I'm talking. In September, when that happened, the 2 weeks before the October 7, in September 22, when that terrorist Netanyahu came and spoke in the United Nations, and he put the map, and it was all blue, and he said he will annex Gaza and he will annex the West Bank, and there was no Palestinians, and he was bragging about having relationships and normalization with Saudi Arabia. 2 weeks later, what do we have? October 7. There will come a day where the Muslims in general and the Arabs in particular will thank the Palestinians for doing what they did in October 7, because we saved them. So the Balfour Declaration in 1917 offer was applauded by international Zionist movements, especially in Eastern Europe. But subhanallah, the majority of Jews did not like it. Especially Edwin Montagu, who was the Secretary of State he was part of Lloyd George cabinet, and he was a Jewish, and he said, I'm Jewish, and I don't approve this. I'm British. Why you want to take me to somewhere else that is not my land? And this is a Jewish guy in Britain, right? But the idea was not for that. The idea was to establish a buffer zone for the Muslims never to rise again, especially the Arabs. Then after that, now we have the treasons that took place by Turks first, who ousted Sultan Abdul Hamid. Sultan Abdul Hamid did not allow the migration of the Jews to Palestine. At that time, Palestine, up until the time Sultan Abdul Hamid left, they had only 3,000 Palestinian Jews. They are Palestinian Jews. They are Canaanites who lived there, and they still live there in the West Bank, in the city of Nablus. All right? When the Turks, the Union and Progress Party, and the Young Turks came as a favor to the Zionists, because they helped them overthrow Sultan Abdul Hamid, they allowed them to migrate there, and they allowed to establish the Jewish National Fund to establish in Palestine. And they start selling lands. The Ottomans start selling lands. And the first land they sold was the Marj bin Amir, which is in the North Palestine and Nazareth region. They sold 2,471 acres of land. If the ones who sold Palestine lands first were the Ottomans, and I want to make sure you understand this. I am not attacking the Ottomans. The Ottomans have a rich history for 600 years. And I always talk good about them until Sultan Abdul Hamid. You cannot erase the Ottoman Empire for what happened after Sultan Abdul Hamid by the nationalist Turks. So I'm talking about the nationalist Turks over here. All right, who were under the control of the racist seculars and collaborated with the Zionists, as well as the Freemasons members, who were minority. These were the minority Turks. The Turks in general, as a nation, would never ever sell Palestine. It is the minority traitors among them back then. So if the Nakba of the Palestinian catastrophe signifies the expulsion of Palestinian citizens from their land seizure, it happened decades before 1948. Before I continue about the Arab treason, I want to make sure, because you will hear, and I'm almost done, you will hear a lot of Arab traitors from the Arab public, not the governments. All right? They say the Palestinians sold their lands. The numbers I'm about to give you, you can find them in the United Nations archives and the British archives. Palestine as a whole is 13 million dunam, which is 3,212,370 acres. The Ottomans are the ones, because of the secular Ottomans, the secular Turks, are the ones that started selling the lands. And the lands they sold to pay the debts of the Ottomans was 1.9% of the land of Palestine. They sold directly to the Jews. And that's 60,684 acres, 1.9%. The Palestine at that time had a lot of rich Arabs who are not Palestinians. They are from Lebanon and from Syria mostly, and they were not even Muslims. They were Christians. They sold to the Jews 113,977 acres of land. That's 3.5% of it. And the majority of that 3.5% was from a Lebanese Christian family, from the Sarsak family. The Palestinians, on the other hand, the lands that was sold by them was 1%, and that was 32,123 acres of land. 90% of that 1% was not really sold, was taken by force because of taxation, because of not able to pay debts, and they did that, the British did that on them in purpose so they can take the land from them. A few of them, the capitalist Palestinians, few of them did sell, but they were not even 0.5% of the population. At that time, Al-Mufti Amin al-Husseini, rahimahullah, made a fatwa for any Palestinian to sell any land to the Jews is considered a kafir and will not be prayed on and will not be buried in the Muslim burial. After that, none of that happened. So the 1% was from that. 90%, and then British occupiers, when they took over, they annexed by force, not bought, annexed by force 244,140 acres of land, which is 7.6% of Palestinian lands gave to the Jews. So that's the majority of the land was taken by force by the British. So when the Israel state was before the United Nations made the partition in 1947, the Jews owned 14% of the lands of Palestine only, all right, of which 7.6 was given to them by the British. So whoever Arab tells you, forget about the Palestinians, they sold their land, you are talking to a nationalist, racist, ignorant, traitor Arab. The last part is the Arab nationalist reasons. Then, to add insult to injury, some minority of the Arab revolted against the Ottoman, minority, because not all the Arabs, and allied themselves to the British, with the British, who they aided and abetted to occupy Palestine in November 9, 1917. So they become kings, emirs, generals, and presidents, correcting the mistakes of the Turks back then with a bigger mistake. The majority of the Arabs were with the Ottomans, and they realized the corruption and betrayal of the racist seculars who ousted Sultan Abdul Hamid, and they wanted to correct it, but they couldn't. Turkish historians estimate that there was 300,000 volunteer Arabs in the Ottoman army because they wanted to protect it and wanted the Islamic Empire saved. But the traitors, Abdulaziz bin Saud, Sharif Hussein, and the Egyptian army, while Egypt was under the British occupation and had King Fuad at that time, the first, are the ones who were paid and assisted the British to overthrow the Islamic Empire and defeat the Ottomans. Abdulaziz bin Saud was not a pro-Zionist, but he did all the work that would assist the Zionists take over Palestine by defeating all the Arab tribes who were loyal to the Ottomans and wanted to save the Islamic Empire. So because bin Saud was against the Khilafah and was against the Turks. Saud family was anti-Turk and anti-Khilafah. Gertrude Bell, who was an British archaeologist and a spy for the British, recommendation was to pick bin Saud, Abdulaziz bin Saud, to fight the Ottoman and to destroy the Islamic Khilafah. Bin Saud also defeated the other traitor, Sharif Hussein, who was against the Ottomans, but he was also anti-Zionist and he was against dividing Palestine, and give a piece of it to the Zionists. Sharif Hussein troops attacked the Ottomans in Palestine and Syria with the aid of the British spy Thomas Lawrence of Arabia. They attacked the Ottomans from the Gulf of Aqaba, which historians say that was the reason. The third time they were able to defeat the Ottomans. The British, through the Egyptian army, tried twice to defeat the Ottomans. They couldn't. The third time, through the treasons of Sharif Hussein and his sons, were able to. The British were defeated twice before because of Gaza, but succeeded the third time when Sharif Hussein troops, under the leadership of his traitor son Faisal, who later on became the king of Iraq as a reward for his treason, with Thomas Lawrence. Then the fall of the entire Levant. Gertrude Ruth Bell, the queen of the desert, the makers of the kings, recommendation was for Abdullah ibn Sharif ibn Hussein to be the king of Transjordan and King Faisal to be the king of Iraq, and Abdulaziz bin Saud to be the king of Saudi Arabia. One of the most prestigious Islamic institution of Azhar scholars, Sheikh Muhammad Rashid Rida, rahimahullah, said regarding the treason of the Egyptian army, which was under the control of the British back then because of occupation, who wrote an article in his Manar magazine, the Egyptian army conquers the city of Jerusalem but raises the flag of the cross. The British flag is a cross. In the year 1917 AD, during World War I, the British general Edmund Allenby led the so-called Egyptian Expeditionary Force, which consisted of huge Egyptian army under the command of English officers. He led it in the Third Battle of Gaza after his predecessor, General Archibald Mary, failed to occupy Gaza twice. Allenby was able to surprise the Turkish garrison in Gaza, and this is the Sheikh Rida is writing, I'm quoting him, which showed heroism, and he carried out an operation to bypass it from Beersheba, which in Gaza, and occupied Gaza after it was destroyed, and the minaret of famous Al-Umari Mosque fell its wall by Muslims. Walls were demolished. General Allenby then headed toward Jerusalem and was able to enter it, raising the cross flag over the minaret of Al-Aqsa Mosque and saying his famous words, "Here we are back, Salah ad-Din." Then Sheikh Rida continues, there is no doubt that every zealous Muslim in the world feels grief and bitterness over the occupation of Jerusalem and its fall under the yoke of the Crusaders and Zionists. But what increases this grief and bitterness is that it was handed over to these oppressive infidels with Muslim hands. And that's the fact. So the shame of the Arab treason would stay on Abdulaziz bin Saud, Sharif Hussein, along with their families until today, and the Egyptian army until the Day of Judgment. Sharif Hussein wanted the Khilafah transferred to him and his kids and wanted to be the king of the Arabs, but because he was against the establishment of the Zionist entity, the British had Abdulaziz bin Saud to defeat him and kick him out of the Arab Peninsula. Then he was ousted to Cyprus. Abdulaziz was awarded the entire Arab Peninsula, and it was the recommendation of the British ministry back then to change from the Sultanate of Al-Hijaz and Najd to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia as a reward for them destroying Al-Khilafah and destroy anyone who was against the establishment of the Zionist entity. The traitor sons of Sharif Hussein were fine having Zionists take a piece of Palestine as long as Faisal becomes a king of Iraq and Abdullah the king of Jordan, which I explained was the East Palestine since the Roman era. At the end, I just want to tell you this. The Palestinians since 1948 have only three choices and no other. Either leave the country of their forefathers, be subjugated to the neo-Nazi fascist terrorist entity, or die. In October 7, they decided to die, but they are not going to die peacefully. And that's what they did. The holy sanctuary in Mecca and Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina are protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. as the Rasul ﷺ said. But the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem is protected by the strength of faith of the Muslims, as our scholars explained, and Sultan Abdul Hamid reminded us with that constantly, because he knew the plans of the enemies of God. So as long as we have no justice to the Palestinians, there will be no peace. And if you want to see the explanation of the last ayah in Surah Al-Imran, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu isbiru wa sabiru wa rabitu wattaqullaha la'allakum tuflihun. All believers, patiently endure, persevere, stand on guard, and be mindful of Allah so you may be successful. Just look at the people of Palestine. And at the end, I'll end with what the Sheikh al-Mujahid Azzuddin al-Qassan taught the Mujahideen of Palestine to say, وَإِنَّهُ لَجِهَادٌ نَصْرٌ أَوْ اسْتِشْهَادٌ. It is a struggle, a physical struggle. We either become victorious or we either die over it as a martyr. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.